Hey everybody, and welcome to part 1 in a very special 5-part video series. If you haven't been living in a cave for the last couple of years and you're into 3D, you probably heard of Henry Chervenka. Now Henry won tons of challenges. He is an awesome ZBrush artist, and per my request he created a 5-part video series in ZBrush on how to create a 140H road grader. Okay, he's showing his full workflow, so this is a rare treat. Check it out. This video has been made possible by BENQ. If you're a digital artist in need of a professional monitor, then check out the link below.
Hey everybody, this is Henry Chervenka, and today we're going to do some hard surface modeling in ZBrush. Before we get started, there are some things I like to cover very quickly to help prime you for these videos. So the model that will be made in these videos will be a 140H road grader, also known as a motor grader. The end goal for this model was for a high quality render. With that being said, I also wanted to keep the topology in check. Not only for good wireframe renders, but also to be able to UV it so I can use Substance Painter for the texturing. The time spent modeling this project was over 100 hours. Now, no one's going to sit there and watch me model for that long. So I try to limit myself to 5 videos, each video being about an hour long, with the goal of showing my workflow and also all the different techniques used. Repetition was limited as much as possible to provide the most value with the time permitted. An example of this is the hydraulic hoses and bolts. I will definitely show the technique one time, however you will not see me create every single hose and bolt on the road grader. It was a time-consuming project, and hopefully you will find this type of tutorial useful. Final note before we start. You may notice the lack of user interface interaction and pop-up menus. That's because I'm using a plugin called Genie Voice Command, created by Heather McCabe, and I have been loving the time saved by not using a keyboard or digging through the palettes. All the actions in ZBrush are done verbally, so because of this, I'll be saying what buttons were used and where they are located. So let's dive right into it and start modeling the road grader. Start out by importing a reference image to the texture palette and adding it to Spotlight. Adjust the opacity from the dial and press Z when you're ready. Pressing W to bring up the gizmo, click the gear at the top and select Polycube. You can adjust the edge loops by the cones in the corner. Orientate the cube to be Z forward and Y up. This will help with other ZBrush operations down the line. Rotate and hold Shift to snap the cube into an orthographic view. Once you line it up with the reference, do a quick mirror and weld and turn on symmetry by pressing X. Mirror and weld is located in the tool palette under geometry inside the Modify Topology subpalette. Mask out the edges and move them with the gizmo to better match the reference. Before moving the model, go up to the document palette, ZAppLink subpalette, and click Custom 1 to store the view. Now you can move the model to the other reference view. Adjust the model's proportions and click Custom 2 in the ZAppLink subpalette to store that view. You can assign hotkeys to these ZAppLink buttons or move them to your UI to help speed up the workflow. Return to the side view and mask out the whole model by control-clicking the canvas. By masking the model, we can add primitives to the subtool. An unmasked model will be replaced by the primitive. The location and orientation of the gizmo will determine how the primitive will come in. At any point while the original model is masked, you could split off the primitive into a new subtool. This is done by going to the Tool palette in Subtool under the Split subpalette. Depending on which one you want as a new subtool, you can either click Split Unmask Points or Split Mask Points. Now we can mask our model, move the gizmo, and bring in a polycube. Another way to remove the edge loops on a cube, and the method I prefer, is a button called Delete Loops. That gem is tucked away in the Tool palette under Geometry in the Edge Loops subpalette. Remember its location. We'll be using it several more times in the following videos. When hard surface modeling in ZBrush, try to work in orthographic mode. You can periodically switch to perspective to get an idea what the model's looking like, but then switch right back. Another good habit to practice is to work in symmetry as much as possible. If it's asymmetrical, see if it's symmetrical enough at its base to warrant off starting with symmetry before breaking off. Add another polycube to the rear and block out the engine housing. This blockout stage is the ugliest part of the whole process, but it's essential. By blocking out the model with basic shapes, we are doing two things. First is establishing the proportions. Next is breaking down a complex model into smaller, more manageable sections. The more complex a model is, the more you may have to break it down. Focusing on smaller portions of a larger model will help from being overwhelmed. So as we are going back and forth between views, let's talk about the type of references you should have for the blockout stage. A lot of people like using blueprints, but I actually prefer images. Even though images will be in perspective, I get more information from them. I only use blueprints as a last resort. Also, not every model you make will have blueprints. For this tutorial, I decided to go with the screenshot of the finish grader because it will be less distracting and easier to follow along. As you're blocking out the model, don't feel rushed. It's better to make adjustments at this stage rather than when all the details are modeled in. At the same time, don't feel like you need to block in every piece you see. Focus on large, dominating shapes, shapes that make up the majority of the silhouette. The other pieces will be modeled and scaled according to those primary forms. Now that the cab and rear is blocked in, we can move on to the front frame. Up to this point, the process has been mask the model, add a primitive from the gizmo, split the primitive into a different subtool, and then adjust the mesh to the shape of the reference. So we're going to switch it up a little bit. Instead of the first two steps, which is mask the model and add a primitive, we are going to duplicate the model by holding down the control key and then move the gizmo. Instead of splitting the duplicated model into another subtool, we're going to keep the front frame all together. After moving the edges of the duplicated model, unmask everything. Then hold Ctrl and Alt while dragging a selection around the end of the mesh. That will mask everything except that selection. Click the Go to Unmasked Mesh Center icon in the gizmo, then hold down Ctrl while moving the gizmo. That will extrude the face that was unmasked. Alt-clicking the rotating arrow icon in the gizmo will reset its orientation to world space. Clicking that button without holding Alt will reset the gizmo to the world space and take any unmasked mesh within the subtool for the ride. Repeat the same procedure for the very front of the frame. While you're rotating, you can hold down Shift to snap the rotation in degrees. If you want to adjust the snap angle, you can go to the Z plugin palette, open up Miscellaneous Utilities, and set the snap angle to any number you wish. After setting up all three sections of the frame, press Ctrl-Shift to activate the Select Rectangle brush, and drag select the polys between the two meshes. Drag again on the canvas to invert the selection. Then delete the hidden polys. The Delete Hidden button is located in the Tool palette under Geometry inside the Modified Topology subpalette. Time for Zmodeler, the bread and butter of hard surface modeling in ZBrush. Hover over an edge and press the space bar. Select Bridge as your edge action and two holes as the target. Click on the edges to bridge the hole. When clicking on the second hole and keeping that button pressed, You can move up and down to adjust the amount of edge loops, and left to right to adjust the curve. Now let's go back to the cab and set some edge loops as guides. Select the Slice Curve brush, start slicing in edge loops where the windows will be. Control-Shift to drag out the line, and spacebar to move it. Before adding too many loops, unmask the polygons where the rear window will be and extrude out. A lot of the times I will move the gizmo out of the way by holding Alt. This helps me see what's going on without the gizmo obstructing my view. Continue adding in guides, and when finished, press Ctrl W to set a single polygroup to the mesh. Repeat the same steps to the engine housing, setting in the guides for the panels. Control-click the canvas to mask out the engine housing and move the gizmo to the plow. Grab a cylinder 3D and adjust the H divides to 32. Scale the cylinder according to the reference. Mask out the cylinder and grab a brand new cylinder 3D from the gizmo for the tires. Match it up to the reference on the side view. Then take it over to the front view. Scale it in and bevel the edges with the Zmodeler. To set up edge loops for the rim, I use the slice circle with square and centered enabled. You can also use Zmodeler, but I prefer using the slice brushes. With the gizmo, Control move the tire to duplicate and position. Unmask, then mirror and weld. Press Shift-Z to turn off Spotlight and check out your model. While it looks horrible in this stage, it's actually what I want. Proportions are good, and I can start setting up different subtools for each section. Next, we will start modeling the tires and have some fun with array mesh. Let's start out by modeling the middle tread. Polycube from the gizmo, then delete the edge loops. Extrude and move points with the gizmo to form the general shape. It's a very similar process to that of the blockout stage. Make sure the model is snapped in ortho so you don't start pulling out uneven polys. Focus on the 2D shape first, then rotate it and start making adjustments in 3D. Only going to model one strip of the tread. Then array mesh it around the base of the wheel that was created earlier. Modeling the middle piece first will help me line up the outer tread's position. The middle tread will be a separate object from the outer tread. Once the 2D shape is created, I'll rotate the model and scale it correctly. Either grab the slice curve or the Zmodeler brush and add an edge loop at the bottom. I prefer the slice curve for straight edge loops because it provides a poly group with the slice. Then Q-mesh the poly loop. To get a nice even split with your edge loop, switch from single edge loop to multiple edge loops, with the modifier set to specified elevation of 0. Hover over a poly and select crease as your action, poly loop as your target, and outer targets as the modifier. Crease the bottom poly loop and press D to activate dynamic subdivision. Increase the smooth subdivision slider to 4 and see how it's looking. All the dynamic subdivision settings are camped out in the tool palette under the geometry subpalette. The final step for the middle tread is to give it a bit of a curve. Bring up the gizmo and click on the gear icon. Select Bend Arc and move the middle yellow cone down. You could press Shift to lock it to 5-degree increments. I went with a 10-degree angle. Once you're happy with your arc, go to the gear again and click Accept. Now we're ready to create the outer tread. Append a polystar, leave it unmasked, and grab a polycube from the gizmo. Scale it down and move it to the outside. So just like the middle tread, I'm looking to create a 2D shape first. Rotate it to match the scale of the middle tread. Bring out the slice curve to add in the bottom edge loop. However, I don't want the entire edge loop extruded. So using the Zmodeler to assign new polygroups will help with targeting the extrusion. With Q-mesh and the target of polygroup all, I can extrude the polygroups that are clicked on. Alt-click the polys I want to move, select the transpose action in Zmodeler, and then click on the white polygroup. Reset the gizmo by alt-clicking the rotating arrow icon and move the polys into place. Repeat the same steps on the other side. Slice in more edge loops and start collapsing unneeded edges at the bottom. My thought process during this stage is, where do I need edge loops to control the shape? Where will I be creasing, and which edges do I need to remove, all while keeping the poly count under control? The clip curve is great for straightening out those edges on the back. It also needs a gradual slope, so it will match up nicely with the main tire. Move the bottom down a little bit to give it more thickness. There are still some more tiny tweaks that need to be worked on before duplicating it to the other side. So when lining it up, I'm looking at the distance between the middle tread and the outer. Once I get that looking decent, I can start extruding out the inner faces and join them in the middle. As long as I get the unwelded verts closer to each other than those of the welded verts, I can use the Weld Points button with a low weld distance on the slider to merge those verts. The Weld Points button is located in the Tool palette under Geometry inside the Modify Topology subpalette. To finish off this outer strip, we will match the same arc as the middle tread, a 10-degree angle. Move the tread up so the slope of the middle tread is blending. During the array mesh part, we will feather in that transition better. Before we array, we have to set up our polygroups. Using a Zmodeler brush, polygroup the two ends of the mesh that will be connecting. Now append one of the blockout tires that we made earlier. Scale it up and place it near the tread. We will use this as a guide for the array mesh and also the base for creating the main tire. Select the outer tread and turn off the eyeball in the subtool for the middle tread. Turn on Array Mesh in the Tool palette, set the number of repeats to 32, then go to Rotate, and in the X amount we want 360. Press Lock Position, Lock Size, and move the gizmo outwards until it starts resembling the tire treads. Uncheck lock position and move the tread around the tire. Scale the tread in and keep adjusting the position until it fits. Make sure both ends line up. Next step is to move the points of the original mesh close to the neighboring array mesh. This stage will take a few minutes, so I will move all the points off camera. When all the points are close, navigate back to the array mesh palette, make sure extrude and close is on before clicking make mesh. This will bridge the polygroups we set up earlier. Now I can weld points since they are really close together. Activate dynamic subdivisions and look for different polygroups. We will need to adjust the weld distance slider until the points are welded. With the Zmodeler brush, remove the unnecessary edge loops inside the tread. Hover over an edge, select Delete as the action and Edge Loop Complete as the target. Sometimes it helps to get out of dynamic mode to select your target. Next is setting up polygroups for the tread. In the Tool palette and under the Polygroups subpalette, you'll find Group by Normals. This will give you different polygroups based on surface angles. Control-Shift-click on the interior and Control-Shift-drag on the canvas to invert the selection. Now that the polygroups are set up, click Crease PG located in the Tool palette under Geometry in the Crease subpalette. Mask the outside of the tread and run a Polish by Features. Located in the Tool palette in the Deformation subpalette. This will smooth the border. Let's finish up by giving the tread some thickness. With Q-Mesh Polygroup Island, start extruding out. Without releasing the button, hold down Shift to switch from extrude to a move operation. Let's model a quick tire base using the Zmodeler brush. Hover over a face and press spacebar. Select Q-Mesh and Polyloop and punch in a hole. Adjust the hole with Scale Polygroup Island. Bring out a nice curve in the tire with Insert, multiple edge loops, and with Interactive Elevation. Single click on the other side to repeat. Add in a couple edge loops in the interior to control the fall off. For the top, we want an edge action of Slide with Edge Loop Complete to adjust the polyloop. Back to multiple edge loops with Interactive Elevation to create the lip. turn on dynamic subdivisions to see what we have. Punch up the smooth subdivisions and scale in the tire to help form it to the tread. A couple more tweaks and we'll be finished. Now for the middle tread. Open up Array Mesh and set the repeats to 32. Rotate 360 on the X amount. Click Lock Position, Lock Size, and this time Transpose. Bring up the gizmo and press Y to switch to the Transpose line. Locate the yellow circle in the Transpose line and move that to the middle of the tire. The yellow circle is your array pivot point. Once you get it close, go back to the Array palette and click on Pivot. Use the slider to fine-tune the position. If the slider is moving too fast, you can single-click on the slider to enter a value, or double-click to bring up the second slider. The second slider will be right above the main slider and will move your pivot in smaller increments. Once everything is set and looking good, you can click on the Make Mesh button to lock it in. Make sure gizmo is in the middle of the tire. Mask the tire, click the gear and bring in a cylinder 3D. Adjust the position and split mask points. Crease the edges and in polygon action, inset a flat island with inset region turned on in the modifiers. Go to solo mode and insert an edge loop near the edge and Q-mesh the inner poly loops. Do some beveling and edge slides to create the lip of the rim. What I really enjoy about Zmodeler is the speed and freedom. I don't have to switch between vertex, edge, or face before doing the action. Just hover over the component you want to affect and go to town. I also love the fact that I don't have to type in numbers every time I want to perform an action. Being interactive keeps the flow going. So I'm setting up a couple edge loops in the middle as guides. I forgot to turn on symmetry, so I'm going to do a mirror and weld and then press X. Q-mesh the outer poly loop and adjust the lip. Q-mesh the middle and then turn off symmetry. Inset flat island to give a new poly group. Then QMesh polygroup that island. Scale the flat island and add an edge loop for the cap. Since we scaled in the extrusion, it's going to give us a nice rounded curve when we turn on dynamic. If the QMesh operation starts snapping to other polygons, you can switch to extrude. Do a group by normals to check if the pole is welded. If it gives you multiple colors in the middle, you will know it's not welded. Keep the weld distance to 1 and do a weld points. Do another group by normals and those interior polygroups should go away. Crease PG and start uncreasing some edge loops to give a nice rounded corner. Now let's work on the back of the rim. Insert an edge loop so you can QMesh the interior. Add a cylinder 3D and change the H divides to 20. Since the rim will have 10 bolts, I want to double that number in the cylinder to create the holes the bolts will go through. Scale and crease the edges. Inset a poly loop on both sides. QMesh the polygroup island all the way through. And notice how QMesh deletes the faces and bridges the holes with one action. Let's continue to adjust and position the cylinder into place. Go to solo mode and place an edge loop right down the middle. Hover over a point and select Split Points. Click and drag out on the point. Single-click the other points to repeat the operation and the size of the split. Select our front plate polygroup and delete the hidden geometry. Q-mesh all polygons and double check to see if you have double-sided off. If the faces are reversed, then click Flip. Double and Flip are located in the tool palette under Display Properties. Click Crease PG. Because the poles are touching the corners, we want to Q-mesh a poly loop on the inside and outside. This will help with pinching and turning on dynamic with a lower crease value. Mask the mesh and bring in another cylinder. Split mask points and crease the ends. Go to solo mode. In Edge Action, select Insert Multiple Edge Loops and the modifiers as Specified Elevation with alternate polygroups. Then select Q-mesh with Polygroup All. As you Q-mesh, click Alt to regroup the polys. Crease PG and turn on Dynamic. Now we can go to Array Mesh, set the repeats to 10, rotate the X amount to 360, turn on Lock Position, Lock Size, and Transpose. Press Y and move the pivot to the middle. Go to the Array pivot and use the sliders to feather it in. Click Make Mesh to apply the array mesh. With the cylinder scaled past the front rim, the flat surface will be perfect to drag out insert meshes on. Press S or spacebar to scale up the brush to the size of the cylinder. Grab the IMM Model Kit brush and select one of the bolt heads. Drag it on the cylinder and press Ctrl to snap it to the size of the brush. Then split mask points. Since this bolt will be used a lot on the road grader, I will remove some of the edges to reduce the poly count. With the bolt head in place, turn on array mesh and repeat the same steps as we did with the cylinders. Now that the cylinder served its purpose, we can delete the polys that will not be visible. Move the bolts closer to the rim. Let's go back to the main rim and select Q Mesh with Polyloop as the target. One thing that is handy is as you're Q meshing, you can press Ctrl to split off a duplicate of your target area. It's a separate island, not vert welded to any other mesh. It's a lot faster than bringing in another primitive to modify. So now we can split it off to another subtool and continue modeling. Go to solo mode and add an edge loop. Q mesh with single poly as the target and alt click every other poly. Then Q mesh them up as you're pressing Alt to change the poly grouping. Change Zmodeler to scale and polygroup all as your target. Group binormals and crease PG. Turn on dynamic for this subtool, turn off solo, and turn on dynamic for the other subtools. Since the tire is composed of multiple subtools, we have to merge them all together to make the process easier. You could merge them one by one, or what I like to do is merge visible. This will duplicate the tool and merge all subtools at once, keeping your original tool untouched. So let's go back to the original and split off one of the base tires to a new subtool. Then go back to the merged tire and append the base. The base tire will keep the same size and location once appended. That way, we can match them up in this tool before appending the merged tire into the road grader tool. Now at this stage, we could just append the merged tire into the road grader scene. However, later on in the modeling, the road grader will become very heavy and hard to navigate. That is why I like to show this workflow. So once it's in place, we can go back to the road grader tool and append the merged tire. It will come in at the right size and location. Before we duplicate the tire, I like to set up different grayscale values to my model. This helps me separate different pieces visually. So with only the tire visible, I will set that to a medium gray. I like using FJ Tools for this. It's a free plugin with lots of cool options. After the color is filled, I will duplicate the tire using the gizmo. If there's any lag, turn off dynamic. Once they are in position, I will mirror weld them over. Make sure local symmetry is off. The final step is to delete the blockout tires. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in part 2 where we'll tackle the engine housing.